Okay, so here we are on chapter 10. There is a lot of information in this chapter. Some of it will be familiar from what you already did, the Connect module. Some of it you may just know from your actual lives. But I want you to really, really dig into this chapter and read it. I'm going to go very fast through this stuff because I can't cover it in a way that makes sense this way. Really read the chapter. So, this chapter is all about assessment and the IEP process. If you remember, IFSP, Individual Family Service Plan for children who are 0 to 3, and then IEP, Individual Education Plan for children who are older than that. The IFSP is the one that we're going to spend the most time on because generally those are the children that we'll be working with, although you may be in a place where you have children with IEPs too. So the biggest difference is in an IFSP, it's family focused, and IEP is much more focused on what's happening in the classroom. Okay. So, 6 steps: screening, determining eligibility, determining services, planning the program, monitoring progress, and evaluating the program. Screening is basically, is this a child that we think needs to have further assessment? So, your book talks about child find. Oh, it's going to go. Okay. Um, Screening is assessing the child to see if they meet the requirements for an IEP or an IFSP, right? So, criterion referenced assessment is the child is measured against a preset standard, right? Not compared with other children. Norm referenced is compared to other children of the same age. The thing is, though, criterion referenced assessments, those standards are based on sort of a norm, but there's a difference. Like I said, read your text because this is going to be um, much better explained there. Okay. So, what generally happens is that children are, um, a parent or a teacher sees a child has what they consider to be a delay. So then what happens is you find somewhere to have the child assessed. Sometimes you might just suggest to a parent that it seems like Ruby has some hearing issues. Have you had her hearing tested? You might want to check with her pediatrician or her doctor. That's a good place to start, right? Because a pediatrician or a doctor may go, oh, yeah, we think there is a problem. Sometimes, though, pediatricians or doctors are not the resource that they used to be. And so you need to be an advocate for that child. So, Child Find is a program where it's basically like um, we're here. If you have a child that you think has delays, we're happy to assess them and we'll move from there, right? So, screening is the first step, right? Um, Screening is looking at the child, doing a variety of different screening instruments. You may have heard of ASQs. Um, ha- Looking at the child's um, what the results of their screening, and then saying, okay, what we see is this. Now, what are we going to really look at? How are we going to follow through with this? Okay. So, who does the screening? Professionals and paraprofessionals do the screening. It's not necessarily something that um, parents or classroom teachers should be doing. But if you know the basics of it, it is a good place to start. And if you say to a parent, I've kind of looked at some of the screening things, and we think that there are areas of concern here. That's a good place to start. But your job is not to diagnose a child. Your job is not to say, well, your child clearly has autism and something needs to be done about it, right? Your job is to say, I've noticed something, and here is how you can find out more, right? Um, Screenings are hard Sometimes because the kid that shows up for a screening, it's a snapshot. The kid that shows up for a screening may not be the kid that you see every day in your classroom, but it is a good way to start the evaluation process. Whoops. Of course, language differences, cultural differences can make an impact on how assessments work, right? If you're trying to talk to a non-English speaker to do the assessment, that makes it hard, right? Different cultural practices may sort of mess around with assessments. So, why are you qualified to make any sort of indication that you think a child has special needs? Because you see children every day and you know how typical children develop, right? And you see that particular child every day, and you can see how his development is going. And so, your job is really, in addition to teaching those kids and loving those kids and supporting those kids, to look for those developmental issues that other people may not be seeing. You have the training, you have the eyes to notice those things, whether you think it or not. Um, and it's your job then when you see those what you might be concerned about, those things you might be concerned about, it is your job to record that stuff. And we've talked in other classes about making observations and making them not opinions, but facts. This is what happened. This is what the child did, right? Not, I think that they did this because they did this because of whatever, or they did this. Um, Keeping track of all that stuff so that you can hand it off to the parents who are taking the child out to be assessed. You can hand it off to the therapists who are working with that child, right? How to do observations. This is a whole thing that you should know by now. But you also want to make sure that you are not diagnosing children, that you are not labeling children, that you're not jumping to conclusions. That kid may be a disaster and have every sign of being having autism. You know, he may not be verbal, he may be flapping his hands. It may just be a very bad day for that child, right? So that's why you need to make sure that you are seeing these issues or behaviors over a period of time, right? Developing a good relationship with families, listening carefully, making careful judgments, and being culturally sensitive. IFSP, Individualized Family Service Plan, works with families of infants and toddlers with disabilities to identify priorities, resources, and concerns. Family is a key component. Services are decided, and families are given support to utilize these services. So, if you are in the middle of the IFSP process. So your child has been assessed. He's been found to have a measurable delay that would qualify him for services. Then you meet with service providers and the family. So you're the family. You're going to meet with the service providers to talk about what are your priorities? What are the most important things that you think this child needs to be working on, where you want to see development? It's not up to the service providers, it's up to you. You get to set those priorities, you, the family. So I'm going to post some videos of some IFSP meetings to see how that works, because what happens is the provider or the service providers, therapists, will say, well, we think that she needs to be able to run faster, and the parents will say, well, okay, we think maybe that's important, but we're really much more concerned about her language development. So then the IFSP team, which is providers, service providers, therapists, whoever, um, see, okay, this is the family's priority. That's what we need to work on. Um, Parent teacher meet to discuss concerns, both share information, decision is made, whether further screening is necessary. That might be your part, right? You might be pre-referral. You might be sitting down with the parent and saying, I think this child needs extra help. and here's how you can get it, and here's why I think you should do it. And many, many, many people will, families will go, oh, I don't know what to do. It's going to cost me so much money. I don't have the means, the resources, the time for that. What they need to know, what you need to tell them is that most likely, if your child is found to have um, developmental disabilities that meet the eligibility requirements, you get free services. So this is not something to be scared of. This is something to actively go out and seek, right? Children are screened to see where they are developmentally, strengths as well as concerns are noted, and family input is given into prioritizing the findings. So that's what we just talked about. Families should not feel like they are in the hot seat through this process. They should feel like a vital member of the team. IFSPs must be evaluated at least once a year. With very young children, they're most likely going to be evaluated more often because that development happens so fast. Changes are made to goals that have been met, and goals not met are reevaluated for the new year. The service coordinator is the person who puts it all together. Okay. Um, Parents can serve as service coordinators, and they should be allowed to, and that's great, but they should also know that they don't have to, right? And then when a child is moving from an IFSP to an IEP, so at 36 months, there is a transition program that needs to be undertaken. So this is important because a child's going from a whole set of caregivers and service providers and stuff that they're doing into a whole new land, into a preschool or child care facility. And so there needs to be some sort of transition program in place. It's required by law to make that as smooth as possible. And of course, parents should have input. IEPs are for students once they reach the school system. Okay. Many of you may have children who have IEPs or have worked with children with IEPs. People who serve as classroom aides are often there to work with children who have IEPs. And the IEP team, again, is made up of various disciplines. It's made up of parents, teachers, social workers at the school, and then various therapists and providers. This is much more based on the education process. So, making sure that the child is where they need to be going educationally, and they're in the least restrictive environment, that they're getting equal opportunities, and that they have the services that they need to excel and to do as well as their peers. Same thing, assessment. Um, And once you have this assessment, all of the pieces go together to figure out what the plan is going to be. IEPs are annual as well. They should be very explicit in what are the goals, and they should be goals that you can measure, right? And then you should have short-term objectives to get to the goals. We're going to talk about this a little bit as you write your IFSPs. We're not going to do IEPs, but um, even in an IFSP, the things that you want to set as goals for the child need to be measurable, right? You can't say, I want my child to be like all the other kids. Well, what does that mean? What are the steps to get there? Specific services are listed in there and how it all should work. So it's a plan for how the school is going to work with this child, how you as a parent are going to work with the child, um, all of that stuff. So I'm going to skip through a lot of I didn't skip through a lot of it. It's 504 plans are a little bit different in that they are not nearly as prescriptive. It's not as wide ranging. A 504 plan might be something like, my child has anxiety in loud, um, crowded environments, so she can't go to PE. So, what are we going to do instead of that? 504 plans are generally based on the assessment by a doctor or a mental health professional or something like that. So many students have 504 plans as well. So that's that. Like I said, read the chapter. There's a lot here. And I will put 2 videos, I think there are 2, of IFSP meetings with parents and all of the IFSP team and the service coordinator. So you can watch how that works. Okay, chapter 10.